the flexibility that I bring to the practice and to what I do has really that's people say, wow, thanks. Most my prior attorneys just said, no, you can't do that. And then they stopped talking with us.
Okay.
You're coming up with ideas on how you can continue with the business, continue to build the business with less exposure, less liability.
Hi, folks. Sven Nelson, C2C Resources, also known as the guy that gets you paid. Today, I am here with my guest, Richard Daniels. Richard, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and telling everyone who you are and what it is you do exactly.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sven. Thanks for having me. So,
Absolutely.
my name's Rich Daniels. My company's Intrepid Legal. I'm a fractional general counsel. I work with medium-sized companies who can't afford a full-time in-house attorney, help them with all aspects of their business. And I utilize my background in business and my MBA to help them with both strategy and legal issues. So I'm helping these, business owners, founders, owners, CEOs, help them grow and scale their company and avoid any of the legal mishaps that a lot of businesses run into.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, definitely a much needed service. And speaking of legal mishaps, what do you think is the most common legal mishap that business owners and businesses get themselves into on a regular basis?
So that's a great question, and I didn't realize this until I started this business probably 3.5 years ago. A lot of these businesses don't have a contract in place. Some of them work off of purchase orders, or they work off of just some small terms. But if they ever get into a dispute, even if it's not a dispute, there's no terms that outlines and defines what the relationship is. So if they have a problem, they have no real way to resolve that problem. And some of these companies and some of my clients that I've kind of helped, they're doing tens of millions of dollars worth of business, and they just don't have anything to rely on. And it not only protects them, but it protects their partner, whoever they're working with, whether that's a raw material supplier or a co-packer or whoever it might be that they're working with. They don't have that protection on both sides.
I've seen that myself. Being in the collections business, we'll get an account turned over to us, and hey, where's your credit application that outlines your terms and conditions? Well, we don't have one. And I mean, I've seen judges actually throw a case out and say, "Hey, sorry, you didn't extend them credit because you don't have terms and conditions." I mean, have you seen something like that?
I haven't seen it. I've heard of things like that. I've heard of issues like that. I haven't seen it up close, but I think that judge is right, because a judge or a jury, or even if you go to arbitration, although I don't know how you go to arbitration without a contract, but if you're in front of those triers of fact, they have nothing to rely on. So
Right.
they can't say this party's correct, that party's not correct, or vice versa, because it's just a he said, she said situation where there's nothing to rely on from a document standpoint.
There's nothing to interpret, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's 100%.
So let me ask you, what do you have a mentor in life or someone in the industry that made you want to be an attorney? Somebody that you followed throughout your life that you were like, man, this is who I look up to.
Well, it's interesting. So my dad was a chemical engineer, and he was very practical in a lot of things he did. Engineering was clearly not my style when I learned that early on, but he had a very practical approach to things, and that was kind of my first kind of mentor. I think was my dad. He's the one who prompted me to go to work for a while before I started law school, see what the real world is like. But over the course of my career, I've had a number of different mentors who have helped in numerous ways, and I'm always learning. I'm still learning at this point in my career, and I really enjoy that aspect of it. And there's people that I think we all look up to, either on our careers or our personal lives, that really have an impact. And I have numerous folks that have helped me along, have just guided me, given me confidence, given me ideas how to do certain things, and it's been very helpful.
No, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, I think mentors are definitely an important part of our growing up and our education, right? And
Absolutely.
what drives us. So, what's one of your favorite client stories that you've had a success story with a client that you really sticks out?
Well, part of what I try and do generally with my clients is, everyone looks at, no one wants to talk to the attorney, right? The attorney's one. I liken it when you were a kid, you didn't want to go to the principal's office. And I think that people don't want to talk to the attorney because they think they've done something wrong. But
Right.
I try and make it very welcoming and being proactive and looking at it as a proactive aspect of things. Not that you've done something wrong, but let's prevent things before they get to be wrong. That being said, one of my clients, one of my big things, I started working for a client and they hadn't had any legal advice in well over a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And I
Hmm.
started looking at their contracts, and they had numerous contracts with a bunch of distributors, bunch of manufacturers, all different. It ran the gamut of commerce. And these contracts were missing many terms. One of the terms that they were definitely missing, they had no termination clause. So if it was a 5-year contract, the client was stuck for 5 years, whether something went bad or whatever, they had no way to get out of them. So what I had to do is I had to rewrite almost every contract that the company had, which were, like I said, voluminous number of contracts, and then renegotiate it with parties who were very reluctant to do so because they said, "Oh, we have a contract in place," but those contracts were negotiated and drafted by some salespeople who were just looking to push it through so they could get their commission. They didn't
Right.
even read the contracts. So that was it took some time. It was a little stressful, but we got it done, and it helped the company tremendously because they were able to have good contracts that they were able to enforce, and if they had to get out of one here and there, they had a way to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So we were talking earlier about your biggest mistake that you see companies making is not having terms and conditions, or maybe even a credit application. What is it about the credit application or terms and conditions that you think people fail on most when they do put that in place? Is there anything in particular that you see stick out a lot?
That's a great question, Sven. There's not one thing that sticks out. I do find that when people, on the flip side, when they do have contracts, terms and conditions, or other contracts, that the person who's responsible or authorized to sign those, they don't always read those contracts. And so it's almost to the extent that they don't have a contract because they're not sure what's in those contracts. And those could have provisions which favor the other party considerably to the detriment of my prospective client.
Sure, sure. Yeah, one of the other things that I see a lot in, let's say, a personal guarantee, right? Somebody just
Hmm.
says, "Hey, let's put a personal guarantee in." One of the mistakes I see a lot is they'll actually have the signature line for the personal guarantee and the social and everything, but then they'll put the person's title there.
Right.
And once they put the title there, it's no longer a personal guarantee; it becomes a
Correct.
corporate guarantee, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
a lot of people just miss that and make that mistake.
Yeah, and with personal guarantees, there's also a lot of, especially in California, there's a lot of hoops that you need to jump through to make sure it's going to be an enforceable personal guarantee. And so from the perspective of maybe your clients who want to enforce that, but on the flip side, you got to make sure that the person giving the personal guarantee realizes what they're doing by signing that document.
Yeah.
And I think they need to be coached and advised and counseled, what they're doing, what they're getting into when they do sign that for an organization.
Yeah, and California is one of those strange states. They just came out with the Rosenthal Act. I don't know if you're familiar with that or at all or not.
I'm not, but I'm always, like I said, I'm always willing to learn.
So the Rosenthal Act essentially, from my understanding, any business debt that's under $500,000, it's treated like a personal debt. So the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act comes into play, and there's certain nuances and things that we need to follow as a collection agency, and even creditors now have a lot harder time or a lot more things that they need to do to extend credit and manage that credit once they've extended it, and even trying to collect it is a more difficult issue there. So, the Rosenthal Act has definitely changed the way that we have to collect in the state of California as a whole, for
Yes,
sure.
I can imagine. Well, one of the things with California, it's like you said, it's a different state with a lot of reasons. It's, I have a lot of clients from an HR perspective because this is a very employee favorable state, and it lends itself to make your business a lot more expensive if you are working out of California.
No
And I
doubt.
know, yeah, and I know a number of clients have talked about moving their principal place of business out of state.
Out of state. Yep.
Yep, it's something that's really starting to be more attractive just because for all the regulations and things they have to go through, and they're not business favorable, unfortunately.
No, they don't seem like a business friendly state at
No,
all.
no,
And a
and
lot of people complain about that for
yeah,
sure.
and then to me that's so counterintuitive because you want businesses to come to your state because
Right.
that generates revenue, right? Tax revenue and other things. And if you start continue to lose people, lose businesses to other states, it could eventually have a very strong impact on the economy of the state.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you think it is that people misunderstand about your profession as an attorney, as a business attorney?
Well, like I said, I think people are very reluctant for a number of reasons. One, they hear about the exorbitant fees that attorneys charge,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're very reluctant to get attorneys involved. That's one of the first things that I hear even when I have discussions with prospective clients.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to incur the cost. But what I try and tell them is if you don't incur the cost initially, and I'm not as expensive as some firms because I don't have all that overhead. Um, but if you're not proactive and preventative in what you do, it's going to cost you more in the end. You're going to have to get a litigation attorney, and you're going to have to, you know, and no one's happy at litigation because
Right.
at the end of the day, I probably shouldn't even be saying this, but at the end of the day, the only people who make out are the attorneys.
The
They really
attorney.
are.
Yeah.
And I just started a practice with a partner of mine, and we do litigation, but we try everything we can to keep our clients out of litigation.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's just something you can't do.
No, I try to tell my clients like, hey, let's not just rush to suit, right? Like my whole thing is let us work the account in house, and we'll drop it through three, sometimes four in-house collectors before we even think about going to litigation because it opens you up to a whole nother liability. Now, once you file suit, they can countersue you for free, right? So
Yeah,
you've got now another liability. And I think that a lot of people get themselves into trouble thinking that, hey, yeah, I'll just sue this guy, we'll get a judgment, and then we'll get paid. And it really doesn't work out like that at all. It's a long, drawn out process. There's a lot of liability that you open yourself up to. And I think people really just misunderstand how that legal process really works. I mean, in the end, I've always said that our justice system is not set up to collect money, it's set up to dispense justice. I'm assuming that you agree with that.
I do, and not only that, it takes a long time, right? In most states, I mean, there's some matters. If you file a lawsuit now in California, I don't know what it is. I guess it depends which court you're in, but it could be 3 to 5 years before you get some type of resolution if the parties are not open to resolving it early. I try and any of my clients that are involved in litigation, I try very hard to get them into a settlement posture early on so they can resolve it because one, it's just going to cost additional money as they go on. Two, they need to focus on their business, not on litigation. And that's where I think I come in handy because I kind of take the owner, management team, CEO away from focusing on their legal issues and have them focus on the business. And then I handle all the legal matters for them. So there's a lot of value added there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could see where that could be some serious value add. Let me ask you, I know that most attorneys, unless they're a collection specific attorney, don't really like doing debt collection. Do you agree with that, or have you seen, I mean, have that same kind of attitude towards it, I guess?
Well, it's not the most glamorous part of the practice. Although I'll tell you this, there's a few folks that I know who do. That's all they do. They collect big debts. One attorney I know, the first thing he does, he doesn't even send a demand letter. He'll file a complaint, and he sends a complaint, and he's been very successful. He gets those cases settled early on because the money's owed. There was another gentleman I worked with earlier in my career who was also very effective. All
Hmm.
he did was debt collections, and he was very effective. And we talked a lot because I knew him, and I just was wondering, but he said he's just very aggressive, and it's not an area that a lot of attorneys go into.
Hmm.
I think if you're good at it and you really know the law and how to impose that upon somebody, you can be very successful. But it's not something that I ever really looked at because, like I said, I'm trying to add value, and I know that does add value to collect debt for a client, but
Sure.
it's also can be very time consuming and costly.
No doubt. Absolutely. So, what do you think the best compliment you've ever received from one of your clients is?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think one of the things that I kind of pride myself on is, you know, there's a lot of attorneys that are asked certain things. Like, and I even got this when I was a traditional general counsel in-house. People would come to me and say, can I do this? What's the ramifications? Can I do this? And a lot of attorneys are conditioned to just say, no, that's very dangerous. That's going to expose us to big liability. And that's where they stop their analysis, they stop their recommendation. What I do is, and maybe it's a little bit more of my business background or my MBA, I say, no, you can't do that. However, maybe you can do this, this, or this. And I come up with two or three alternatives, and then I make a recommendation. And I think the flexibility that I bring to the practice and to what I do has really that's people say, wow, thanks. Most my prior attorneys just said, no, you can't do that. And then they stopped talking with us.
Okay.
You're coming up with ideas on how you can continue with the business, continue to build the business with less exposure, less liability. So I think that's and I've heard that from a number of clients. They really thank me for being that flexible and open to advising and counseling them on other areas that they could use to build their business.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So, how would your parents or significant other describe what it is that you do?
Oh, wow. So I think what they would say is, that I'm a partner in a business, in the sense that I come into a business and I learn the business not as well as the owner or the founder or the CEO, but I think the only way I can be effective is if I really learn someone's business and what their stumbling blocks may be. So I think someone would describe me as a counselor and an advisor who acts like a partner in the business and is invested in that business, and that I help them with all their issues, not only legal. I get involved in business discussions as well for my clients because that's
Mhm.
really important. And there is an overlap between the business and the legal, but it's helpful that I can add some business sense and business value as well. So I think that's what they would just say that I'm a partner to a business and I help them and add value along the way.
So, I too get to talk to a lot of business owners and I learn about a lot of businesses because of my involvement in their receivables and all of those things, or in my lending business, and I'm helping them find capital for their business. Because of that, I just get to learn a lot of different businesses. I'm curious, what's the most interesting business model or business that you've learned to date?
Um, I'm going to talk about industry. I'm not going to
Yeah,
pull a
sure.
client. I'm
Industry,
not
yeah.
going to pull a client because what I'm going to tell you is it kind of carries along. I'm involved. I have clients across the board. I have all different. I have a law firm. I have a coaching business. I have a networking group business. Number of different, but I really enjoy consumer packaged goods, and I think I do that because it goes from innovation, coming up with new products. So you deal with the IP and the patents and trademarks and things of that nature, all the way through from manufacturing, supplier, distribution, all the way through, hopefully not, but you may get to a product's liability. So it kind of is the lifeline of a product. And so that's the most interesting to me because you're handling all different aspects of a life cycle of a product. And so that's what I really enjoy. The consumer products are the most fun for me.
Yeah, you get to see a lot of different aspects of the business from birth to actual inception. That's yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
that's awesome. So, if there were three people that were dead or alive that you have ever thought about having dinner with, who would those three people be, and why?
All right. Well, I'm fascinated with science, and so I think one person I'd really like to sit down with is Stephen Hawking. I
Oh
think
yeah,
I think that would just be really super interesting.
Mind
Um,
blowing if
yeah.
you can keep up with them and understand it, right?
Well, that was my next point, Sven. That was my next point. I may come away from that not understanding anything, but I think it would be really interesting. Um, Another person that I think, and I haven't really thought about this, is, but I think I'd like to sit down with Abraham Lincoln, just because he dealt with the country at such a important time, and the things he did, and he seemed very practical, and not to get political here, but he seemed to really invest himself in the country and have a lot of good things to say. Third person, hmm, I don't know. Maybe again, this is more science wise, and I find this gentleman fascinating. Some people don't like him, but Neil deGrasse Tyson is someone else who's
Yeah,
who's somewhat interesting as well. So I think the three of those folks would be an interesting dinner companion.
that's awesome. Those are awesome. All interesting people for sure. So I think in business, we always talk about our successes, but I believe personally that we learn a lot more from our failures. Is there any particular failure in business that you've had that you really, really learned from that you think maybe could help some others out by you telling that particular story?
That's a great question, and like everyone, I've had my failures. Um, I think one that comes to mind is I was dealing with a client, and they had this they were involved in a litigation, and it got very involved from an arbitration standpoint. And we, right before the arbitration started, we had almost settled the matter, and it would have been best for my client to settle the matter. Unfortunately, the CEO handled it more from it was his gut and not his brain that was thinking, and he was very much against settling. And to tell you, it was just one term in a settlement agreement that he didn't like, and he didn't want us to negotiate. He said, "We're going to go to arbitration." Went to arbitration, and my client got hit pretty hard, even though I tried to talk the CEO out of it. So maybe that's not really a failure, but I consider it a failure because I cost the company a lot of time and money. So I think you can't go with your gut. You have to be smart in how you're dealing with your business. I've had another client that I was able to talk out of litigation, and she was very thankful after the fact. So I think, even though litigation is a part of life, especially in the United States and in business, if you can stay away from that or get into protracted litigation and stay out of that, you're much better off from a business standpoint.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. So, there's a lot of talk about AI and technology, and I know that e-discovery is huge in your business. I work with a lot of e-discovery companies actually doing their collections. How do you think that AI and technology is going to affect you and what you do beyond what it already has?
Yeah, great question, and very, very relevant. So I actually did a presentation a couple weeks ago on the effect of AI in the legal profession. When AI first came out, everyone said the lawyers are going to be the first ones to lose their jobs. That they're going to be replaced. Well, I think we're pretty far away from that. I think you always need, the personal touch of the attorney.
Sure.
Um, AI has really started to take flight in all aspects, and even in the legal industry. I use it, but you have to be very careful because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
100%.
Whether and not only that, there's certain sites like ChatGPT that if you're using confidential information, it's no longer confidential. They share prompts and results from prompts with third parties. So you have to be very careful. And I think at the end of the day, you know, even though it's a great tool, saves a lot of time, there's a lot of issues still remaining with it. And I think it's going to take some time for all those to flush out and flush out on a legal perspective too. For instance, when you do some AI work, who owns the results? Is it the chat GPTs of the world, my client, the attorney? I mean, these things have not been flushed out. So there's just a lot of things that I think we're very much in the early stages. And I think as time goes on, things will get better. But I still think, it's not replacing not only attorneys, other folks as well. Maybe down the road, there will be certain jobs that will be replaced, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I see it more as a crutch or an assistant at this point in time. It's certainly not doing the full job of a lot of things. I mean, I don't foresee it, taking over a sales job completely yet. And there's a lot of nuances there with like permissions and TCPA and all
Oh
those
yeah,
things that definitely need to be thought out, for just sales in particular and reaching out and customer service. I can only imagine what has to be flushed out from a legal standpoint. I mean, that's just a lot of nuances and I mean, different states and different just different laws and things that you really have to be aware of and know that your information is correct. So yeah.
exactly. And the thing is, at the end of the day, especially now, like you said, it's someone you can't rely on it 100%. And I think there's some attorneys who have, and they've run into problems in court. I know they've been sanctioned for, the hallucination AI, where they come up with case law that doesn't even exist. Things of that nature have come
Wow.
about. But I do think at the end of the day, and I've seen that. I've seen that in some of my results and queries. You get a case and it's, wow, that sounds really good. You look up the case, it doesn't exist.
Wow.
And yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I mean that's happened, and you got to be very vigilant and look at that. But at the end of the day, I'm ultimately responsible. I can't tell a client, well, that was Chat GPT or whatever the case may be. I'm the one who's got to stand up and say, yeah, that was me. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any books that you recommend to people, about business in particular, with regards to legal and contracts, or any books in general, books that you like?
No, no, there's different ones out there. I mean, there's nothing that I use as kind of like my Bible.
Sure.
I look at different things and kind of take a little bit from here and a little bit from there and kind of just put them all together. And I think my experience, I've been doing this for a while, so that really has been helpful in how I do things. I'm open, like I said earlier, I'm open to learning new things, and some people you get something out of a book and they have a good idea. I'll be the first to use it if it makes sense, but
Right.
I don't have a Bible or a book that I'd say, hey, if you want to learn contracts, here it is. That's
Sure.
the way to go.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, you definitely need to have somebody like you to bounce stuff off of because I think each one of these contracts or situations, the scenarios, they all have their own little nuances and things that, in particular, that only, have to do with what they're doing, right? Their particular subject matter. So I definitely wouldn't want to rely just specifically on one book. That's for sure.
Yeah.
If you could talk to your 20-year-old self, is there anything that you'd go back and tell yourself, that you've learned over the years, maybe as some advice for your earlier, younger self?
Yeah, I think that, this is going to sound a little bit corny maybe, but just try and do your best. There's certain things that are out of your control that you're never going to be able to fix or control. So just do your best and and always be straight with people. I mean, I think that's one thing that's really helped me. I've been very straight and honest with folks, and I think they recognize that. And that's why I have a lot of clients that come back to me
Yeah,
because I'm very, if something's bad, I don't hide the truth. I kind of tell them, and I've always done that. I think you probably do that in your business as well, right? If
100%.
if there's something wrong or there's an issue that you see, don't hide the truth because I've seen it, and I'm sure you have. When you do that, you get yourself in a big. I've had clients who've done that. They haven't told the truth, and you get wrapped up in a lie or a misrepresentation, and it never goes away. So
Yeah,
I think just do your best and be truthful with people.
I think that's good advice. Like in my business, a lot of salespeople are afraid to call a client back and tell them maybe they're not going to be able to collect the debt or what have you. And for me, it's like, hey, I'd rather tell them we're not going to collect it, and here's why we're not going to collect it, so I can hopefully help them prevent those issues later on. So I think
Yep.
that's fantastic advice. Well, closing out here, is there anything else that you'd like to say or bring up? Any particular topic or anything in particular?
No, no, I really appreciate reaching out and having me on this podcast. It's been great to get to know you, and I hope we can continue our dialogue going forward. And I
Absolutely.
really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you as well. Thank you so much for being part of this. I think you had some interesting points, and particularly, I think it's helpful to hear people from, or for people to hear from an attorney that contracts are a necessity, terms and conditions are real, and you do need to have them.
Yeah,
So
I mean, like I said, to do all that type of business, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars, and you don't have a contract, you have a few terms on a purchase order, so dangerous, so dangerous.
the days of doing business with a handshake are over,
Oh
unfortunately.
my gosh, especially with all this remote,
Yeah.
that we're doing. I mean, you can't do it on a handshake because you can't shake your hand through the computer.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you very much, Richard. It was a pleasure having you on here. I really, really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you being part of this.
Thanks again, Sven.
Yep, you got it.